as most of us, if not all of us, are aware, the prophecy of Daniel is a book that highlights future events from the times of Daniel in very precise detail that encompasses the whole time frame from Daniel's times right through to the kingdom age. And we see kings, despots, and monarchs learning by experience that there is a God in heaven who is a revealer of secrets, who rules in the kingdoms of men and gives them to whomsoever he will, a God who weighs kings in balances and finding them wanting deposes them, a God who stops the mouths of lions and protects his faithful servants and reveals to them his purpose in the most minute detail. Now, the major prophecies in the book are essentially the same message, same events that are setting out the path that history will take over the coming centuries, but from differing perspectives. For instance, the image dream of Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 2 is from the perspective of Nebuchadnezzar as king of Babylon, being concerned about what is going to happen to his kingdom in the years to come. Chapter 7 is a repeat of the image dream of chapter 2, but from the perspective of Daniel, the faithful prophet of the Lord, being shown in greater detail many years later those same movements of nations and kingdoms that he had been caused to reveal to Nebuchadnezzar. Chapter 4, you will remember, has Nebuchadnezzar being taught that there is a God in heaven who rules in the kingdoms of men, giving them to whomsoever he will and setting up over them the basest of men. And then chapter 5 sees Belshazzar learning the same lesson, but too late now to humble himself as his grandfather had done, and he is losing his kingdom and his life in that one fateful night. And then in chapter 6 we see exactly the same message really being shown to Darius, the Median king, who took over from Belshazzar's kingdom. I want therefore at this point to run quickly through an overview of the book of Daniel, and then come back to chapter 8 and the ram and the goat prophecy and see what I perceive to be a marked difference relative to the other prophecies within the book. So we go through first, you have the introduction to the book with Daniel and his 4 friends refusing to eat of the king's meat and being blessed ultimately and being able to stand before Nebuchadnezzar as learned and wise men above all others. Daniel chapter 2 is that image dream where Nebuchadnezzar learns of the God in heaven who reveals secrets through his servant Daniel. And then at the end of that chapter, Daniel is elevated in his kingdom. In chapter 3 we see how Nebuchadnezzar tries to circumnavigate that image dream and make the whole image of gold, and if he can make all nations worship it on pain of death, then in his mind, as I see it, his kingdom is going to stand forever. Then chapter 4, the dream of felled and banded tree. Pride over his achievements is judged by the Lord. He will have his rule and his authority taken from him for a specified period of time. And so he declares just a year later, "Is not this great Babylon that I have built?" And in that moment the voice comes from heaven and he is driven from men and he eats grass like an animal until he acknowledges that the Most High rules in the kingdoms of men and giveth them to whomsoever he will. Incidentally, in one of the records I read, it suggested that the illness that Nebuchadnezzar suffered at that time was porphyria, which is what affected King George III, you'll remember. And we have that recent film that was released on the madness of King George. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. In chapter 5, there is the final night of Belshazzar's reign. He makes this feast and desecrates the temple vessels, and the writing on the wall appears, Mina Tekel Upharsin. Daniel interprets the writing And Belshazzar dies that night as the Medes enter under the gates on the riverbed and take the city of Babylon. Chapter 6 is Daniel, you remember, and the lion's den. His adversaries are jealous of him and they plot against him. And Darius learns the power of Daniel's God and then decrees that all nations under his authority will worship the God of Daniel. In chapter 7, that is in the first year of Belshazzar, the prophecy of the image dream of Daniel chapter 2, now revealed in greater detail to Daniel. 4 beasts representing 4 kingdoms to come, exactly the same as chapter 2, and then one like the Son of Man comes with the clouds of heaven, and is given to him dominion, glory, and an everlasting kingdom that shall not pass away. And of course we all understand what that means. Chapter 8, the ram and the goat vision. More of this in a moment. And then chapter 9, the 70 weeks prophecy. Daniel is given revelations regarding the Messiah to come, who is to make an end of sins, to bring about reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness. Then chapter 10, Daniel is given this glorious vision of Messiah in his kingdom, which leaves him in a deep sleep with his face toward the ground, as though he is dead, and the language speaks as though he is dead, until a hand touches him on the shoulder and raises him up. And I see that as a form of resurrection. He's being raised up. Very prophetic, of course. Chapter 11 speaks of things yet to come, the continual battle, you remember, between the king of the north and the king of the south. And that chapter continues on in that prophecy into chapter 12, leading to the time of the end. In verse 2, there is the resurrection, there is judgment, and there is the kingdom of the righteous, who will shine as the sun and be a star forever and ever. And the book concludes with, "Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end." So that is a very brief overview of the book of Daniel. But that's not the chronological order in which the chapters come. You see, that's the proper chronological order, and you can identify most of that from the scriptures themselves, from the book. And if you look at the red references down the right-hand side of the column there, that's where you find the different things. Third year of Jehoiakim, chapter 1, the second year of Nebuchadnezzar, in chapter 2. Chapter 3 is evident from the textual context of the chapter. Nebuchadnezzar reigned for 43 years, and there is a space in his calendar, as it were, his diaries, which are available, that show that between the 23rd and 30th year there was a 7-year gap where there is absolutely nothing recorded by Nebuchadnezzar. And so most historians put that down to the time which the Bible speaks of, when he was ill and he was unable to govern his kingdom. After he came to his senses, of course, he would then reign for another 13 years after that. Chapter 7 then is the first year of Belshazzar. Chapter 7 verse 1 tells us that. Chapter 8 is the third year of Belshazzar. And then chapter 5 is the last year of Belshazzar's reign. And the last night, in fact, of Belshazzar's reign in this third year. And then chapter 6, the first year of Darius. I deduce that because as soon as he comes into the kingdom, he sets up the national restructuring of the government, if you like, and that would naturally occur straight away. 9 declares that it is the first year of Darius. Also chapter 11, the first year of Darius, and it's quite clear when you read through that that's one continuing prophecy that runs through, being extended on from chapter 9. Chapter 11 is the continuation of chapter 12 is a continuation of chapter 11. And then finally, in the third year of Cyrus, we have chapter 10, which is the chapter which shows and speaks about the glorious king who will come, Messiah, in his kingdom. So that's the chronology of the book as far as I can detect from Scripture. Right, Daniel chapter 8 then. It is different. The question is, why is it different? Well, it concerns only two nations. The ram, as we know, is Persia from the text, and the goat is Greece. Chapter 8, verses 20 and 21. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Chapters 2 and chapter 7 revealed the movements of nations and kingdoms from Daniel's day through the centuries right through to the establishment of the kingdom that must be given to the saints of the Most High. It is set out in the format of the sectionalised image in chapter 2 and via the four varying beasts that we see in chapter 7. The image dream, as we have already noted, to Nebuchadnezzar, and the four beasts vision specifically to Daniel in the first year of Belshazzar, the grandson incidentally of Nebuchadnezzar, not his son. Nabonidus was the son of Nebuchadnezzar. Belshazzar was the second ruler in the kingdom because his father Nabonidus was still alive. He was prince regent. And that is the reason why in chapter 5 he is offering whoever reveals the writing on the wall and interprets it the third place in the kingdom. He couldn't give him the second because he was the second. His father was the first still. Daniel then is given the four beasts vision in chapter 7 in the first year of Belshazzar's reign, and is very much an affirmation to him of the interpretation that he had given to Nebuchadnezzar many years previously. And chapter 7 follows the same pattern, the same nations of the earlier prophecy. It is detailing events that lead right up to what we understand as the kingdom age. Why then is Daniel given this new vision in chapter 8 of the ram and the goat less than a year after that of chapter 7? Had God changed the order of events? Well, no, that cannot be, can it? God is not inconsistent. He doesn't say one thing one year and something different about the same events another. Why are there only two nations referred to in chapter 8? The empire of Babylon was still extant at this time. Why isn't Babylon mentioned then? Why also is there no mention of what was evidently to follow Greece, i.e. Rome, and beyond Rome, up to the kingdom age? The answers to these questions have their beginnings, I think, in Daniel chapter 7, verses 27 and 28. I think that was it. Yes, it is. I put it on a bit early. The kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Hitherto is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my cogitations much troubled me, and my countenance changed in me. But I kept the matter in my heart. You see, Daniel was concerned very much about the future. We can be certain that he made it a matter of prayer, deep and devout prayer. You will remember that he opened his windows in chapter 6 toward Jerusalem 3 times a day, as he was wont to do. It wasn't something he just did on that occasion. He always did it 3 times a day. What did he pray about? He prayed about his people, his land, the holy city. He had been given a vision of the future, of the glory that was ultimately to become a reality in the earth. But the things he had seen and the things that had been expounded to him concerning events that would happen before that glorious time were deeply troubling him. How would it all come about? What details might he have missed? How should he understand all the revealed detail in those images in the visions of chapter 7? And less than a year later, he receives an answer. It is clear and unambiguous. And who he receives the answer from is a big clue. You see, don't be fooled by the terms in the first year of Belshazzar and in the third year of Belshazzar, and that begins chapter 7 and 8 respectively, and think that Belshazzar reigned for 3 years. He didn't. Belshazzar reigned for 2 years only and just a few weeks. History attests to that, and it was just into the 3rd year of his reign that he was overthrown by Darius the Mede. It is my understanding from what Daniel says that he was very concerned for his fellow Israelites and for the holy city. They were very dear to his heart. Jerusalem, the holy city of God in the beautiful land. And that's what he prayed towards every day, 3 times a day. Concerned about what was to happen there in years to come, because nations were to arise who would trample his land and his people and his holy city, or God's holy city, underfoot. Would they, would be the question, or even could they survive the things that he had seen in vision? In answer, the vision of chapter 8, I feel, is given to him. We read chapter 8 together a few minutes ago. Remember, this is still during the age of the Babylonian Empire, albeit during the final few weeks. But all this was just about to change. A ram with 2 horns, one larger than the other, was pushing in from the east, pushing west, pushing north and pushing south. It wasn't going to push east because it was coming from the east, and it was going that way, north, south and west. Nothing could withstand the power of this ram as it inexorably pushed onwards. Verse 4 of chapter 8, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. So there is the ram that Daniel sees coming in from the east, pushing westwards, northwards and southwards. And Daniel would be well aware by this time that horns on animals in visions represent rulers and kings. The animals themselves being representative of nations and armies. And while he considers the vision, another animal appears, and this one is a goat with a single horn, a male or a he-goat. And the he-goat comes from the west, and is on the face of the whole earth and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. As I say, he's coming from the west, and he is moving very fast. So fast it seems that his feet don't even touch the ground. But there is something special about this goat. He is angry. He is very angry. That word kola means a rage. And he is moved with kola, the AV says. And he is a destroyer. He's not just a conqueror, a destroyer. And his primary target is the 2-horned ram. So here is the single-horned goat of chapter 8 verse 7, and Daniel says, I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, with rage. And then the goat collides with the ram, and he smites the ram and breaks his 2 horns, and there is no power in the ram to stand before him. This ram, who had been invincible to everyone else, is smashed by this goat that comes in and stamps upon him. And there was none, we read, that could deliver the ram out of his hand. how much more powerful was this goat than the ram? And then the goat has 4 horns, and one of them is broken. Daniel 8 verse 8. The goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven. I want to read now verses 11 to 14 again. We read them earlier. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practised and prospered. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice, and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, Unto 2,300 days then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. This then, brothers and sisters, was the vision. It is quite evident that at this time Daniel doesn't fully grasp the meaning of the vision, because he says so in verse 15, you'll notice. It came to pass when even I, Daniel, had seen the vision and sought for the meaning, then behold, there stood before me as the appearance of a man. I'm not sure if I've got the right. Oh, that should have gone, I should have put that earlier when I was reading the other verses. Right. He magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down, and a host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practised and prospered. So there is the vision. Daniel is perplexed to understand it. What was he to make of these things? And then Gabriel is instructed to explain the vision to Daniel. Now the essentials of the interpretation are clearly explained and clearly ratified by the historic record. Yes, I thought I missed a couple. Right. He sought for the meaning. That was a screen I should have put up a moment or two ago. And then, behold, there stood before me as the appearance of a man, and I heard a man's voice between the banks of Ulai, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. The ram which thou sawest, says Gabriel to Daniel, having 2 horns, are the kings of Media and Persia. And the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. So there we see a picture of a carving of Darius the Great, the Median king, and of Alexander the Great, who we know was the first king, and the single horn was Alexander the Great, as we know now from history. I don't intend to go into great historic detail about the rise and decline of Persia or Greece. These are clearly enough explained in chapter 8. Instead, I want to address a few questions that exercised my mind when I was considering this chapter. Those questions, and there are 6 of them. 1, why is Daniel given this vision when he had been given the comprehensive one of chapter 7? Probably less than a year earlier. 2, why are there only 2 nations involved? Other visions do include Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and the coming kingdom, yet to become a reality of the earth. Thirdly, why is the goat so fast and moved with choler or rage? 4, why is Gabriel specifically named as the explainer of the vision. 5, who is the ruler, who arises from one of the 4 horns after Alexander's death, and the empire was split into 4 by his generals, you remember, and out of one of them comes another ruler. And what is the significance, finally, of the time period of 2,300 days, or, as we read in other versions, evenings and mornings? As we look at these questions, I think we shall find a consistency that we should by no means be surprised at. Firstly, why is Daniel given this vision so soon after that of chapter 7? Well, we already have begun to see the answer to that a few minutes ago, haven't we? Chapter 7, verse 28, sees Daniel very much perplexed about the things that he has been caused to see. As for me, Daniel, he says, my cogitations much trouble me, and my countenance changed in me. But what was it that caused such perplexity within him? Well, he was very conscious, as we said, of the reasons why his people were in captivity in Babylon. He understood from Jeremiah's writings, because he tells us so, how they are incarcerated there for 70 years. He knows that there are times of retribution yet to come. But what he has seen and what he has understood from the prophecy of Daniel chapter 7 doesn't fill him with any great hope for his people for the future. The 3rd year of Belshazzar and the 1st year of Darius the Mede is the same year. We need to bear that in mind. The prophecy of the 70 weeks of chapter 9 is a continuation of the revelation to Daniel in chapter 8. But in chapter 9 verses 3 to 19, Daniel is concerned to confess the national sin of his people before God. Just one verse, chapter 9 verse 5, you see how he speaks to God. We have sinned, he says, and have committed iniquity and have done wickedly, and have rebelled even by departing from thy precepts and from thy judgments. Now verse 19, the whole of that section down to verse 19 is part of Daniel's prayer. But he concludes, O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, hearken and do. Defer not for thine own sake, O my God, for thy city and thy people are called by thy name. Here is Daniel praying for his people and including himself amongst them. Note that he says, we have sinned, not they, and I've been righteous. We have sinned, he says. And the answer that Daniel gets in verse 20 of chapter 9, whilst I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God for the holy mountain of my God. Yea, whilst I was speaking in prayer, he says, even the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation. And that's verse 21 of chapter 9. Here is the answer to another of our questions. Brother Harry Whittaker, in his book Studies in the Gospel, shows that Gabriel is the angel of answered prayer. Wherever you see Gabriel in Scripture, says Brother Harry, there is a prayer being made. And he is the angel of answered prayer. Consider Zacharias in Luke chapter 1. Fear not, Zacharias, for thy prayer is heard. And thy wife shall bear a son, and thou shalt call his name John. What was Zacharias' response? Whereby shall I know this? And the angel, I am Gabriel. as though to say, I am here in answer to your prayer and you doubt me? You see, this is where Gabriel appears every time as the angel of answered prayer. And he is there to strengthen and encourage Daniel. And now he begins to explain the vision in chapter 8. And the vision, as we said, concerns just two nations. The first of which, Medo-Persia, is about to burst dramatically on the scene in Daniel's experience. The second one, of course, the goat, will be Greece and will be headed by Alexander. Which brings us to another of our questions. Why only two nations when other prophecies show clearly that there are four at least? Quite easily we can see that the Babylonian Empire is at its end. Belshazzar is about to have his kingdom and his rule taken from him, and he will die on that first night of the reign of Darius the Mede. So there is really no reason for his kingdom to feature in this prophecy at all, is there? Because it's about to end. There is no future for Babylon. But what about Rome? Rome was defeated very heavily in future events. Well, I think Daniel is being shown what is about to happen concerning Jerusalem and the beautiful land specifically. And though long enough in real terms, this prophecy is more to do, I think, with things that must shortly come to pass regarding the city towards which he prays 3 times every day. Persia will come, it will be destroyed, and the Greeks will come. Their first king will die, and his kingdom will be divided into 4, as is clearly explained. But there is one other ruler to arise out of one of those 4 states that emerged from Alexander's empire, who will have more impact and more influence over the holy city, and it is to him that we will turn in a moment. But let's just jump back through to the question as to why the goat in the vision comes so quickly and with such a rage. And we need to go back in time to the time of Philip II of Macedon. He had spent many years building and unifying his empire. I've missed putting one of those in. I missed more than one. Getting tied up with myself. Right, we've got on now. There were only quotes, which we quoted anyways. But Philip of Macedon, on the left-hand side of the screen there, in the red, he gradually built up his empire up into this right-hand side over a period of years. And he was gradually beginning to push westward. And he got right to the point of crossing over the isthmus on the Black Sea there and going west and attacking Persia. See, Philip was the father of Alexander. He was planning to move eastwards, not westwards, into Asia. Persia had made incursions into his territory, and there had been forays over the past century. They had become a bit of a thorn in his side, so to speak. And he was now planning a big campaign eastwards in revenge for Persian aggression. And then in the spring of 336 BC, the armies of Philip set out under the direction of 2 generals, Attalus and Parmenio, and they had a 10,000 strong force of highly trained men with them. And they were the foreguard, as it were. These were to pave the way for the main army that would then follow. But just 2 days after they started that, a man called Pausanias, who was a Macedonian noble, assassinated Philip II with a dagger, and he was immediately executed by some very close friends of his son Alexander, who now becomes King Alexander III, ultimately to be known as Alexander the Great. Well, now this angry young king, who is just 23 years of age, is on the warpath. With his armies, he goes and he's intent on destroying this Persian interfering empire. And there is a huge amount of relevant detail that we just don't have time to consider now relating to that campaign. But to me, it does explain why it is with rage that Alexander sets out to conquer this empire. And he smashes the Persian kingdom, honouring his plans and honouring his father's plans and desire to rid himself of this Persian irritant. As history attests to the accuracy of the prophecy, Alexander conquers, and none can stand against him. He appears invincible, taking his armies on further eastwards after he has destroyed Persia and set up the hierarchy of the kingdom there to look after it. He pushes on with his armies going eastwards right across into India and up the Indus Valley, before ultimately turning back and returning as far as Babylon, and that was in BC 323, where he died after an illness that lasted just 12 days on June the 10th or 11th, and aged just 32 years. The most likely cause of his death is said to have been either malaria or typhoid fever, which was rampant in Babylon at that time. After his death, as we know, his kingdom is divided between 4 of his generals. And out of one of these, the Syrian sector, arose a ruler from mediocre beginnings, but by treachery and being utterly ruthless, he clawed his way to power. And he was none other than Antiochus IV, otherwise known as Antiochus Epiphanes. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors have come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power, and he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. What actually happened? Oh yes, I have got that one. Through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. Right, what actually happened then? It was in the year 175 BC that he began his reign. And on coins in the latter part of his reign, he actually called himself Theos, or Epiphanes, which means, literally, God manifest. He raised himself up to a position of a god. And it says he will raise up himself, stand up against the prince of princes. He concentrated his efforts on the city of Jerusalem in 171 BC. He entered the temple, and he insisted on going into the Holy of Holies, and he carried off some of the gold and silver vessels. He decided to Hellenize the land and the people, and to dismantle the whole of the worship of the Lord in Jerusalem and in the temple. A religious persecution of unprecedented bitterness commenced. Sabbath keeping and the practice of circumcision was forbidden under pain of death. Sacrifices in the temple were outlawed. Prostitution was established there. Can you imagine the response to devout Jews? That prostitution was established within the temple. The people of God who loved the word were subject to every kind of degradation and brutality. A Greek altar was erected on the site of the old one on the 25th of December 167 BC, and that was the last straw that led to the Maccabean revolt. The horn, which was Antiochus IV, set itself up to be as great as the prince of the host. It took away the daily sacrifice from him, and the place of the sanctuary was brought low. It prospered in everything that it did, and truth was thrown to the ground. It was all so abominable that it made desolate the hearts of the people of God as they heard what desecration had been done to their Lord and his temple. And all that, brothers and sisters, took place in Jerusalem between the years 171 and 165 BC. It lasted for nearly 7 years. Not quite, but nearly 7 years. Which brings us to our final question. What is the significance of the time period of 2,300 days, or literally, as other versions will use, and certainly the Septuagint uses, evenings and mornings? Well, I don't know about you, but when I see evenings and mornings as referring to a time period, I naturally think of the Jewish day, which begins at sunset and is literally the evening, then the morning, as opposed to our day, which starts at midnight, if you like, and ends at midnight, this morning through until evening. Other versions use the two words evening and mornings, and the Septuagint also changes the time period not to 2,300 evenings and mornings, but to 2,400 evenings and mornings, which adds another angle. Now, Brother Thomas, in his book, The Exposition of Daniel, says he believes that 2,400 of the Septuagint is probably the correct figure. However, he then starts working out dates on the day for a year principle that Christadelphians are very and prone to doing, and so many brethren have done over the years. And the problem with this is, where do you start from? And where are you aiming for as a target date? You see, Brother Thomas came out with 1865 as one of his dates he arrived at. The target date is seen as the ultimate cleansing of the sanctuary in the Kingdom Age by people who use the day for a year principle. I've got the late Brother Ken Osborne's Bible at home, and he's penciled in dates in this chapter of BC 333 as being a start. He comes up with 1897 of the Dionist Congress, and then AD 1967 as 2,300 less the BC 333, which gives us 1967. They were significant dates, yes. But the correct interpretation? If the Septuagint is correct at 2,400 evenings and mornings, Brother Thomas was very conversant with Hebrew and Greek. He feels that it was more accurate to say 2,400. Then should we be really looking then at AD 2067 as the target date? Or is there a much simpler and easy to understand explanation? How about the idea that Daniel is being shown in real time, not on a day for a year principle, but in real time what was really going to happen to his people and to the beautiful land and the holy city and its temple? How would we work that out? Well, there were 360 days in a Jewish year. If we take 2,400 and divide it by 360, we get 6.66 years. That's just about the time period that Jerusalem and the sanctuary was desecrated by Antiochus IV. On learning that, what would you expect Daniel's response to be? O Lord, we have sinned. Verse 17 of the same chapter. Cause thy face to shine upon thy sanctuary that is desolate for the Lord's sake. And verse 19 that we've already read. O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. And the Lord's response? The promise of Messiah to come. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness and to seal up the vision and the prophecy and to anoint the most holy. But it doesn't end there. In chronological order, there next comes the prophecy of chapters 11 and 12. But that's another story and not our subject tonight. Suffice it to say that Daniel is finally, in the chronology of the book, given a glorious vision of the King in all his glory, in the kingdom that is yet to be. And as the book of Revelation declares, the kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. And that is a picture that we all long for and that we all pray for, that it will come soon. Thank you.